you're keeping mail going to the point that we've been hammering home this whole podcast. You're not stopping your bread and butter. You're still doing the deals you've been doing in Colorado and the places you know, and your mail is still producing. So that's the way to test. All right. Welcome, everybody. How's it going back in Colorado, Mesa?
Going. I think that the conversation that we're going to have today, I'm excited to see where it goes because I think we both advocate for different things at different times. And yeah, I feel like I'm being elusive with my answer, but this show will dive into what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, I don't think there's any one correct way to do things. You know, amongst the people we know in the business, there are a million different methodologies, but I think the overarching theme is that everyone that's successful sticks to them in the long run and is on top of their follow-up and lead management. So what we're talking about today, guys, is something that a conversation Mason and I had with someone we know prompted, which was about pivots and how to pivot effectively and not completely ruin or stop the business that has worked for you so far when you make pivots. So we're going to talk through that conceptually a little bit, talk through how to do it with marketing, with how you monetize your leads, with how you go about doing business, and then talk about pivots we're making in our business today. Based on anything.
Yeah, and I think you're going to share the story in a second, which I feel like will really illustrate the point, but also to just get in the mindset and the complexity of it, for a lot of the entrepreneurs out there with that ADHD personality and tendencies to get shiny object syndrome. It's a really, really difficult balancing act, both from a strategic approach as well as just a mindset approach of when it's appropriate to pivot and whenever you are justifying the pivots that you're doing because of either your ego or your attention span or whether or not it's appropriate to do in business, I think is a very useful and interesting topic that we're going to get to explore today.
Yeah, no, all good points. And so talking to a friend of ours who I helped get started in the land space initially, he had been doing very well, had been flipping and assigning deals for about a year, and then for whatever reason got excited about wholesaling houses and thought, I'm going to move all my marketing to houses instead of land, even though he had all his experience and all his success with land. And 6 or 7 months and a lot of wasted marketing dollars later, and he is no longer profitable. What was making him money, of course, is totally stopped. And he reached out explaining the mistake he made and saying he's going to get back into land. And I've seen this so many times. I mean, I've made similar mistakes in my business where mail had worked very, very well for years, and I tried pivoting too heavily to outsourced cold calling, for example. Years ago, I made that mistake and then had a big gap in income or a big slowdown because I stopped doing what was working. I pivoted too dramatically and then ended up in a rough spot. Mason, I know you've had similar experiences.
Yeah, and I think that what our friend here experienced was a pivot in the actual asset class that he was attempting to create a business around, where I feel like a lot of the experiences that you and I have had, Dan, are around we're pivoting from a marketing strategy or a market selection strategy or something like that has resulted in potentially tremendous upside or a decent amount of downside in what we've what our operations have done. And I think that it's so funny because it's so simple, and this is why keeping track of your data is so crucial, because you're really able to see what's working. And I think that a lot of times you hear so often, I mean, we talk about it a lot, of our background or experiences being very transferable or the skills translating into another area. And that's very true for a lot of things, but not necessarily in an entire business model. So while land and houses, they're both real estate related, trying to do the exact same approach that we have in land to large multifamily or commercial or wholesaling houses, it doesn't necessarily work. There are components that work, but I think that whenever you find something that is working, it's really important to stick to it and track it long enough that you can actually determine whether or not you're being currently effective or something is going wrong.
Yeah, those are all great points. And an easy example of that is a lot of the competition that comes from houses into land and tries to market the same way as if it's the same seller avatar, which it rarely is. I mean, you can certainly find, the stressed, quick cash close sort of seller. We got a ground up partners lead this week that fit that, but generally speaking, that's just not the case. And so people are trying to switch asset types without really knowing, and that's why knowing what they're doing. And that's why it's so important when making pivots to keep what was already working going, and layer on whatever it is you're trying to do. So in the context of marketing, maybe if mail's been successful for years and years, don't stop your mail, layer on the cold calling or layer on the SEO. And that way, that those dollars are still going to be coming in from the marketing method that has worked forever. And you can first determine whether the cold calls or the SEO works before stopping or slowing down.
Yeah, and I think we're always going to have a bias towards whatever strategy it is that we first employ. So I think now's a great time to start getting a little specific with when to stay the course or when to pivot specifically with the marketing strategies with your either land flipping business or real estate business. And so to just lay out a few of the different strategies that exist, obviously direct mail. And then within direct mail, there's neutral letters and blind offers are kind of the two categories that I look at. Yeah, there's ranged offers and a few different things, but whether it's an offer or just a neutral letter, I think are kind of the two main direct mail categories. And then there's a different type of cold outreach, which is either calling, texting, emailing, ringless voicemail, which I feel like I kind of lump within the like phone or email category. And those are available both within your own company and having your own people do it, or there's a good amount of outsourcing options too, of hiring another company to do that marketing for you. And then I think the last primary one would be social media and social media advertising for leads. So I know Dan and I have both started our business out primarily, at least at the beginning, just doing direct mail. For me personally, starting out with just blind offers and then moving into neutral letters. And I think starting on direct mail is a good point because that's where we got going in the beginning. And to share the story of how relatable this is at the very beginning of whenever I first got started in business, I just sent blind offers. And whenever I was sending these blind offers, my response rate was huge. I would send 1,000 letters and I'd get 2 or 3 deals out of it. And that happened for my first deal. That happened for my next few deals. But the problem between my first deal and my next few deals was that all of those other strategies that I mentioned, I started going down these rabbit holes and halfway attempting them, and it just, nothing was working. And I was like, this business isn't working. And then I went and sent some more direct mail blind offers and I got 5 more deals. So I think it's interesting and it's funny just talking through this right now. I mean, I never send blind offers anymore. And they worked. And I think it's because I discovered something kind of within it that felt like it was working better. And now I have to look in the mirror, and it's taking a huge amount of lift to go back into a lot of the data whenever I had different systems and tracked different stuff on Excel to figure out what worked. And I know, Dan, you just did a big analysis on your mail. So I'll pass it back over to you to talk a little bit about mail and what your experience has been.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to bookmark everything in my head here, but with the land offer letters, that's a great example of a pivot that I did more effectively, where I had consistently done those up until 2021 and even until the end of 2022. And one of the biggest things that stopped me from doing that is just expanding into quite a few markets, number one. And then number two, when I was hiring people, which started mid 2021, so I haven't done acquisitions since then really, I would rather have less time on my end with getting everything set up on the front end and more practice and iteration and leads coming into the acquisition people. So that was a big part of that decision, but I probably could have kept the land offer letters going longer if I'd wanted to. Another part of the thinking in that pivot for me was I was going to very competitive markets where there are definitely a lot of deals we've gotten where we would never have gotten them if I had sent a land offer letter that was priced accordingly, right? It was only after the rapport. So that was a more effective pivot. And at first, I didn't totally stop the land offer letters. What I did is I kept those going in the markets that were producing, and then I layered in neutral letters to places that were new, that were really, really competitive, and I didn't think the land offer letter made sense. So that was my first point. Now, kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit to what you said about the data kind of analysis I did here recently. Looking back these last 12 to 18 months, cold calling has been tremendously more productive overall than mail. And we've got a lot of killer deals for mail. It's still worth doing. I'm not stopping it, right? I didn't suddenly say, all right, I'm going all in on cold calling. No, mail has been the bread and butter of the business for 5 years for me. So I'm keeping that going exactly as is. But as I'm planning for Q4 and into next year, I'm not planning to up the mail. I'm planning to get another in-house cold caller because of what that data says, which is that cold calling has a huge ROI. So I think that is how I've learned to effectively pivot, where I don't stop the mail. I still have 10,000 mailers going out every month. I'm just layering on more cold calls since that's been highly, highly productive.
Yeah, that all makes sense, and that's why the data is so crucial. And I think that in examining it, going from and kind of going back into talking about just mail right now, the pivot for both of us with land offer letters to neutral letters, I mean, a lot of it was just time constraints, I feel like. And I do think there is the marketing effectiveness, which potentially we've doubled down on that because the data shows it worked really well, and potentially didn't continue with land offer letters for long enough, because I know people are using them and they're effective and everything. But the issue that Dan and I would see with a lot of the models within this land flipping business that people would recommend is that they'd say price by the acre, by the county. And that's just an outrageous thing to do. And so we would go in and we would do it at the subdivision level and be able to price and say, okay, within this neighborhood, in this county, in this state, I know that half acre lots are selling for $25,000 with about 30 days on market. So I'm going to offer $11,000 or whatever for all these half acre lots. And then by the time you do these calculations and you go pull the data, you're ending up only sending 15 mailers. And so you spent 30 minutes or 45 minutes doing all these calculations, pulling all this data for something that resulted in a metric. I mean, the quantity of mailers just didn't even make sense for the amount of lift that it took. So I think if you're more technologically minded than us and you have the systems or people or affordable labor in place to make it so where you can go and very effectively price at this very small level, absolutely blind offers can be very, very effective. But I do want to hammer on the point that Dan made of the problem with the blind offer of, say, for that $25,000 deal, if your number was a little off and say you offered $7,500 or something like that, and which would be a fantastic deal, but potentially insultingly low to the person that maybe would have taken $12,500 for it. You still have a potential, almost double your money deal, but you're turning them off so quickly. So the theory behind the neutral letter that I feel like beyond just time constraints and accuracy within the pricing model for blind offers is it opens the door to get more leads. Your deal close rate might be the same, but your lead rate will be higher, which at least gives you the opportunity to have the soft skills of your salespeople come into play, so where you can have a potential for a greater deal close rate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, agreed on those points. I could definitely echo your sentiment about the ridiculousness of trying to send countywide land offer letters to somewhere that isn't super rural. There are a few places where that makes sense. So the point of this first part, guys, is with your marketing in your business, if something's working, keep that going as you experiment in new places, and not just in marketing methodology, but also in location. So I have core markets that we've been doing business in for years and years and years, and they've been profitable, and we send mailers every 3 or 4 months, and we cold call several times a year. And I'm constantly testing new markets, which is great because we find, kind of honey holes here and there in places that are less competitive but still very in demand. But I don't stop those key markets that have always produced for us because I don't know which of these tests will or will not come to fruition. And so I don't want to, screw myself over 90 to 180 days from now by not keeping the marketing up in the areas that really, really produce. So it's applicable both on the marketing methodology and geographically.
Yeah. So I think in terms of talking about whenever it starts making sense to, let's not call it pivot, but add on or stack the marketing strategies. And I think we'll spend a decent amount of time on actual market selection in a bit, but we both had success with mail, neutral and blind offers. And Dan, you brought cold calling in-house. It's something I haven't done. I've only outsourced it. But cold calling in-house or cold calling outsourced, depending on if you're doing salary or commission only, it's expensive. And so do you feel like there hits a point within business where you're like, okay, I think I have capped out on the ability for this particular marketing strategy to work in this market beyond what I'm actually doing here. So now I need to add or stack on this strategy. What do you feel like that point is, or that moment of realization is, whenever you were like, I need to bring cold calling in-house? Or was that something that was just kind of always there? Did you do it yourself at all at the beginning, or how did that work?
So we started with, this was, I think 2021 was the first time I ever did cold calling for land. And no, it wasn't me. It was my acquisition manager at the time. And she started just with returned mailers, tax lists, very specific, high probability of being someone that would want to sell sort of lists. And quickly, I just saw the margin and the ability to pull more leads out of markets that were kind of tapped out for mail, where, I have one of these markets that I've referenced a bunch of times that really produces, and I've only found mailing every 3 or 4 months to be productive. Well, this allowed us to pull another couple deals out even quicker because it's just another layer, for whatever reason, there's a lot of people that will never respond to mail, and maybe you can grab a couple of them with a cold call. And so that's why, again, to the whole point of this conversation, I like layering on multiple marketing methodologies. So if you're doing 3 deals a month, you add in cold calling, you get that to 5, 7, 9, whatever. You keep layering on marketing methods. And I do have to say, overall, cold calling is cheaper than land, at least based on a return basis. And especially if you set someone up 1099, I'm paying for W-2 people. So that is more expensive, but compared to the multiple on those dollars, it's really nothing. So I think that answers.
Yeah, it does. And I guess on the flip side of that, when to determine to stop doing something of this business, sometimes it takes months and months and months to like actually yield the results from something. So say you got a deal or two in a particular market and they were fantastic deals, and you see transactions occurring, and it's a prime market for this land flipping business, and it's okay, well, all right, I made $30K on my first 2 deals in this market, and now I've spent $20K on marketing to this specific market, and I haven't gotten a single deal. Do you have something within your business of, okay, I need to stop sending mail, or I need to stop cold calling in this particular market, or has that not happened yet?
This is really challenging, and the unfortunate answer is I don't have a clear metric from this because it's tough. You're balancing a lot of times you got to send a lot of mail to get that regression to the mean and get the first deal or two. This is applicable to cold calling, any marketing methodology. And so you don't want to be that person that sent 500 mailers and gave up, where if you send another 2,000, you would have gotten 3 deals, right? At the same time, you don't want to fall for the sunk cost fallacy and just spend more and more and more dollars on something that's not working. And so this is where really staying on top of your data as much as you can and see, all right, what is working, what is producing, so that you can optimize for that and pivot more and more towards that. And so that's why, even though mail is producing, to use a real life example right now in my business, even though mail is working, it's worked for years and years, I'm not increasing it, because when I looked at numbers in arrears for the last 6, 12, 18 months, cold calling has been far more productive. And so I think that's the best way to do it, is just really stay on top of your numbers. And so if you're trying something new, you sent 5,000 mailers, you didn't get anything, but you see, oh, these 3 markets are producing like crazy. Maybe I should add in another marketing method to those 3 markets, as opposed to doing more and more mail to this place that isn't working. So I don't have a clear litmus test for you there, but that's a way to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it goes back into, there's a lot of metrics within the business that I'm starting to track now that I did not track before, which would be, a true level of what the pipeline response is for each marketing method, and what the timeline of, okay, from when so I sent 5,000 mailers to this particular market, which sub-markets within it had the greatest response rate, and what was that response rate, and how long did it take for them to actually respond from when the mail sent or when the cold calling campaign started to when the deal actually closed, and all these time metrics and pipeline metrics that I probably should have been tracking from the very beginning of the business, because you can look at the return on ad spend at a high level of, okay, well, I've spent 5,000 to this market and I made $15,000 on it. It cost me $2,700 in mailing costs and X amount in this, that, and the other thing, and that's fantastic. But being able to see the timeline within the pipeline, you can say, okay, well, I made that 25 grand, but it took me 9 months to realize it from that initial send and that initial mailer. So I sent 3 months, 3 months after that or 4 months after that. Let's see, I guess within another 9 months or whatever, whether or not it's going to continue to produce, so you can start establishing benchmarks. And I feel like that's a point that, it's not necessarily what the show is exactly about, but what the actual determining factor should be, rather than a litmus test of, okay, well, I can look back and see that my benchmarks are off, or, my data is off from what my benchmarks are that I establish based on these successful campaigns that I have a decent amount of data for. So I think that's something that, do as we say, not as we do necessarily, of make sure that every piece of data that you can absolutely track on every lead and every deal that you've ever done is in there, from first contact to last contact and everything in between.
Yeah, no, agreed strongly, because so often we are oblivious to what the data will tell us. Like when I did those numbers on cold calling versus mail, I did not realize how much more productivity we're getting out of cold calling. Specifically, one of my favorite markets in Florida, it's a very competitive market. I realized we had not gotten a mailer deal in that market since, I think, there was one, I think, from 2023, but other than that, since 2022, whereas we'd gotten like 8 to 10 via cold calling. And so I thought, for whatever reason, this market is far better for cold calling. So the more metrics you can track, the more you can make these informed decisions.
Totally agree. And then I think to add to that, and to pivot the conversation just a little bit about market selection you said it was how long, over a year since you got your last mail deal in that market?
Yeah.
And that right there of, okay, well, when do you stop marketing to that? And when does it make sense to stack it? And I think, to be honest, if you are in a position in your business where you do not have the capital resources or team resources to do it, I feel like you shouldn't just keep mailing. If it's been X number of months, you need to stop doing it. And I think a point that we need to drill home here is, Dan, I don't know you have some volume metrics and operational metrics, but do you have a budget you've set of, this is how much I can afford to spend every single month on marketing? This is what my typical marketing spend is, and I need to, move it up and down, either at the market level or at the company level, on pivoting within your business for that specific cost center.
Yeah, approximately. 10,000 mailers a month. And then there's the payroll for the guys that are cold calling and then taking in the leads. And then data isn't that expensive. So I have an approximate budget.
And that right there for me, it would just be like, I have these goals of, send 5 to 10,000 mailers and pay for X number of cold callers and everything like that. But once again, not having a benchmark of knowing exactly how much my cost per lead and cost per deal is, made it so where it's hard to determine whenever to pivot, which is, for me personally, I get the shiny object syndrome, and I'm testing a new strategy out that I'm interested to see. I'm still going to be sending mail. I'm probably going to be doing a little less cold calling just because I'm getting a significantly better return on mail, which has been the case all along. But if you end up spending $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 on these other strategies, it starts getting too expensive to keep sending mail, even though that's the challenge. And I think that's one of like the behavioral, personality mindset challenges of this business, of wanting to get creative and wanting to be opportunistic of what's going on, but also wanting to stay the course. I need to pause it. This is Equity Trust. So with that all being said on staying the course or pivoting into new strategies and budgeting for it, I did just drop $15,000 on social media advertising, and I think there's a few reasons behind it. So Ryan Pineda is someone that I've been following and we've been following in the real estate and social media business for years, and he has this company called Lead Kitchen that does done-for-you Facebook advertisements where Ryan himself will record the videos and target the people that you want to target. So Ryan and I had a call, and I agreed to test it. So I'm going to be the first person that is using it for land. So Ryan's creating land-specific advertisements for social media for me. And I'm nervous about it because I just dropped $15,000 on a brand new test on a nationwide advertising campaign. So as I'm about to say, whenever Dan and I pivot to the conversation about selecting markets and narrowing in on markets versus testing other ones, I'm going on a nationwide approach on a brand new strategy that I'm testing. And I think that I'm very, very interested to see how it works. And beyond the brand recognition that Ryan has and the numbers that they talk about, I think what I've seen so much within other industries, and potentially this is going to be a really great failure story. But the return on ad spend for social media is one of the absolute highest in the industry, for real estate investing, for the education programs, for everything, because I mean, the qualified leads that you're able to get from social media, it's really incredible. And there's so much AI technology involved with it. So I'll be really interested in a handful of months to be able to update you guys on how this particularly worked. And we'll see. Dan, any thoughts on me dropping $15,000 for a new strategy and a nationwide campaign?
Well, two thoughts. Number one is it would suck. It would be frustrating. But if that failed completely, you'd be fine. You're not betting the farm on this $15,000. Number one. Number two, you're keeping mail going to the point that we've been hammering home this whole podcast. You're not stopping your bread and butter. You're still doing the deals you've been doing in Colorado and the places you know, and your mail is still producing. So that's the way to test, as opposed to abandoning or burning the ships to find a new home, so to speak.
Absolutely. And one quick point on it is, I don't know what's going to happen with this. I'm optimistic. My hope is I get at least one deal that makes me $15,000, or 5 deals that make me $2,500 each, or whatever the math is. Probably more than that, but $3,000 each. God bless. But if I get absolutely inundated with leads, which will be fantastic, I think just one operating point that I want to make before we kind of pivot our conversation to staying the course or pivoting on markets in conjunction to the data on the marketing spin is you need to be able to determine when your time commitment is worth it. And this goes back to what Dan and I were saying about the neutral versus the blind offer. If we determined that our time is too valuable to spend an hour on a campaign that might only result in 50 or 10 or even a couple hundred pieces of mail, where this social media ad thing, people might see Ryan Pineda and think it's about a land course or think it's about something in general. And I might spend $15,000 and get 5,000 leads. And being able to go in and qualify your leads very quickly is something that you need to be able to effectively do, and have a rating scale for your leads of, okay, do they even have the product that I'm interested in? Because talk about the easiest way to get shiny object syndrome is, you know what, Mason, I don't have any land to sell, but I have a boat and RV storage. I'd be like, shit, I kind of want a boat and RV storage. I should go spend 50 hours doing due diligence on this. Or, you know what, Dan, I don't have any land for sale, but I have a commercial building in Pueblo West that's built out and has the inventory for a pet store, which is a rabbit hole Dan and I went down a handful of months ago, that I think is still a great business model that we should reopen. But I think it's just being able to qualify the leads and make sure that you're staying the course and staying focused on the asset class, because whenever you start testing new strategies and that might result in something that is unexpected, you could get inundated with the wrong type of leads, which is the worst thing that you can do, is waste a tremendous amount of time, even if after already spending a good amount of money on it. But that being said, I think we should kind of talk about markets and when to stay within a market, when to change markets, and what factors kind of determine that.
Yeah, that's tricky. And again, I don't have clear heuristics for this beyond monitoring where your return is coming from, what your return is in different places. And then given that you have, a finite marketing budget, you don't have infinite money to spend, considering the opportunity cost on that. So, as I look at my numbers and I see certain places that have really, really produced, and then I see some places that they've produced, but they're not great, and those producing markets are huge and I could be sending more mail to, that's a no-brainer. And so it's kind of a constant balancing act where I'm looking at this and using, it's funny, even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of better ways I could be tracking and looking at this more regularly, because just in the last few months, we've had it illustrated to us that there's one of my favorite North Carolina markets has just continued to produce now, 2 years in nonstop. And I'm realizing I probably haven't sent enough mail there relative to other places. So being on top of it, having regularly scheduled times to analyze and make decisions here, and then keeping in mind opportunity costs. So don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy, or I've always done business here, where if you try somewhere new and it is producing, right? This isn't, I just tested it. It's already producing. You're making money consistently. You validated the thesis. Then, all right, it might make sense to double down on that market and reduce marketing spend to other places that have historically been profitable, but not to that degree. So anything you want to say there?
Oh, yeah. I think focusing on a proof of concept and not doubling down, but 50xing down on it, where when you have market familiarity to the point where you know the exact size, location, street number of a particular subdivision, and you know that I can buy land or I can sell land in this market within this period at this dollar amount, you need to freaking exhaust every lead in that particular subdivision. And not even every lead, every person that owns land, where I know in certain places that I'm doing business, I know that 35-acre lots with access on a paved road and electricity is worth X amount of dollars. So I'm going to find every freaking one of those, either, through PropStream or on the county assessor's website, virtually driving for dollars, or actually driving for dollars and skip tracing these people and sending them a text message where all these people are doing this exact stuff for wholesaling. I remember back in the day, like a decade ago, listening to Bigger Pockets, or almost a decade ago, listening to Bigger Pockets, where people would drive for dollars. And you can do that in these neighborhoods, especially if you're close to them. So I think whenever you have a thesis that's proven, or you hypothesize on something and your, conclusion was, hey, this is what I can do here, being able to have that market specific level of knowledge, in certain markets you're in, Dan, exactly how much it's worth. So you can be one of the most intelligent people that's calling, because as the land investing space, let's call it, gets more competitive. for lack of a better word. There's more people in the space. So these people are getting more phone calls, they're getting more letters, and you being able to say, hey, Jim, I drove past your property because I just bought one on this road. I'm interested in buying it because I don't want to have to deal with neighbors or whatever, methodology you want to use whenever you're negotiating. So I think that point is something that I'm really focusing on is, why am I not 50xing down? Because if I can myself go in and spend some extra time on it, it's absolutely worth my time on that point. So anything you want to add specifically there, and then I'll make another point on market selection.
Yeah, really the only other thing I want to say before you do that, we get to dispo strategy, is when somewhere is producing, you should be hitting just about everyone. So the markets that we make money in, we'll go hit local owners, much shorter length, tenure of ownership. Just about everyone other than people that just recently bought will end up getting mailers and cold calls from us. And so just strongly agreed on that point. But I've said everything I want to say on that. So what was your last point, Mason?
So part of the issue is we have such limited data, and it might sound like we have a lot of data, but in the grand scheme of statistics and true stats and whether or not it's statistically significant, we just don't have enough data in our business because neither of us have spent enough money or have done enough to make it super, super meaningful. Not to say it's not meaningful, but who cares? There's one person that listens to this that understands what I'm saying. But I think that there are some more tangible methods of determining when to exit a market or double or triple down. And I think that's on government regulations that are going on within a particular market. So, Dan and I funded a deal in Denison, Texas. And after we purchased the deal, 2 months later, something happened in the city council where there used to be $0 in impact fees. And it jumped to $13,000 in impact fees. And so a lot of builders are exiting the market, and being able to keep up with that of, okay, I'm going into the market. I need to look at what the city council is doing. I need to look at what the planning and zoning division is doing and all this other stuff where people just look and say, oh, look on Zillow, there's transaction data occurring. I'm going to target this market. That's a great starting point. But a government can absolutely overnight change something that is going to wreck the business. Spending time in Denison, Texas, there's 2 builders that are still doing deals. And this could be a profitable deal in that capacity. And builders are still making money out there because less competition. But man, something like that can absolutely disrupt the deal depending on what the model is. And then you have to get creative and pivot potentially with disposition strategies, which is where our conversation is leading, for the last segment of our show today. But keeping up with what governments are doing is one way to determine when to enter or when to exit a market. On the flip side of entering a market, hey, if a huge retailer is coming, if a Costco is coming to town, at Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, these people that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing and, market research and studies of what's going on, you can get really ahead of the curve and enter a market at a really, really great time.
Absolutely. And to that point, a good local expert, a good realtor partner will be able to tell you this stuff. So anyways, great point there, Mason. Let's get into how to pivot and layer on additional disposition strategies. And so, in my own business, when I started this, it was all new construction. That's how I learned about land, and I layered on the land flips. And then those turned out to be quicker, easier, extremely profitable. So I moved to mostly land flips slowly over time with some new construction. But again, right now, it makes sense again to build new, at least where I'm doing it in Colorado. And so I'm starting to layer those back on, but I'm not in any way slowing down the land flipping. It's not, oh, I'm doing this, so I'm reducing the land flipping. It's no, just like with layering on marketing and layering on new markets, I'm layering on disposition strategies as well. So it's the same thing with deal size. I think this is an important point where, the small bread and butter deals that make us 10 to 20 grand, we've done hundreds of those. And of course, it's exciting to think about 100K deals, 200K deals, but a lot of times those can be illiquid and there can be trouble with those. And so as we're pursuing more and more of those 50, 100K deals, I'm not slowing down on the bread and butter 10K, 20K deals, we're just layering those on. So I sound like a broken record at this point, but with disposition strategies too, I don't stop what's working, add on slowly new methods on top of what is already working.
Absolutely. And no, I think we need to sound like a broken record because we need to hear it too of, hey, this is working, keep doing it, even though it's really, 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 really boring. And I think within that of recognizing what's working versus what's not working from like a return perspective of there's deals out there that at the beginning of this, I'm like, if I don't double my money after all costs, after closing costs, realtor commissions and everything like that, I'm not doing the deal. And now if I get a deal where I double my money after everything, I'm like, that's a freaking amazing deal. It just doesn't happen as often anymore in the business because there is some more competition and the market is constantly shifting. We're recording this at the beginning of August of 2024. Mortgage rates just hit their lowest they did in at least a year, if not a couple years now, I believe. And that could mean some really, really good stuff, or it could mean some bad stuff. And it's really hard to say what these huge macroeconomic trends are going to do within this land space. But I've got deals that are sitting on the market for long, long periods of time. And I think my brain got broken with my first deal of, okay, my expectation is I need to make six figures. And in 2 weeks, I'm paying a $400,000 note off. And it's really painful to do. And I'll own the piece of land myself. But at going back and like learning more about this business of, hey, I would rather have a deal that turned really quickly and was less profitable than on a simple flip than have one that was more profitable and took 2 years. And so for people that have worked in the restaurant industry or enjoy going out to eat, I think this kind of analogy has helped me in what I have created and am working on continuing to create and perfect in my business. And there's 3 general sections in the restaurant. And so in the bar and cocktail area where it's happy hour, it's a smaller tab. It's usually a quick turnaround time. Those deals are great for consistent cash flow to keep the business going of making just a couple grand, $2 to 10 grand rapid within a couple weeks if it's a wholesale or an assignment or just a really, really quick small flip in some of those markets that, Dan's talked about making tons and tons of money and where they're just small deals. That's a lot of your business. Let's call it 30% of your business. And then you've got 50 to 60% of your business, which is the main dining area. It's a bigger tab. The table takes a little longer to turn over, but you're able to, spend a little bit of time on it and make a pretty decent chunk of change and a decent return on it. That's the deals like, buy for 30, sell for 70, or buy for 70, sell for 115, or, these like 20 to 50, even 100K deals. And then you've got the chef's table or the private dining experience where you only got one of those going on a night, or you've got 1 or 2 of these bigger deals going on a year. And I think where my business has potentially shifted to is those big deals need to be a decent amount of value add where once the value add is completed, they're going to be able to move very quickly. And this is doing the buy the 200 acres, split it up and, sell all the individual parcels type of thing. So I think being able to stack that disposition strategy of, okay, what actually creates monthly consistent cash flow? What creates quarterly or semi-annual cash flow? And what creates annual or biannual cash flow? And kind of stacking your dispo strategies in that capacity is where I'm operating and where I'm attempting to very aggressively head.
Yeah, I think you made the point very effectively there with that analogy. And that's all I really wanted to say on that. It's reminding me I'd like to sell a few more properties on notes this year because, all of my monthly payroll pretty much is covered by note payments, right? And so that's really nice. And I haven't sold one on terms in a while. So yeah, I don't think there's anything else I'd like to add to that because you made the point pretty succinctly. As we're heading to the end of the show here, Mason, anything else you want to say on the topic in general?
Yeah, I think one thing I put in our notes here was we're talking a lot about data and how the data can be really effective in giving you the adaptability to determine whenever it's appropriate to pivot versus not pivot, and stay the course. And I think a metric that's gotten me in trouble in this business is projected revenue. And I think the problem with a projected revenue metric is it's just a projection. It's an assumption that's made on data. But the problem is it's not real. Like, it's a financial projection of like, I anticipate that Bitcoin's going to go to $500,000, and it never will. Or maybe it will, and who cares about that point. But it's, I think, something that you and I have kind of kept track of for a long time. And the challenge with it is fantastic of, man, I had a quarter where I got $750K in projected revenue through the door. How much of that has been realized at this point? Not 750,000. There's a difference between list price and sale price. And more importantly, there's a difference in the expectation of the timeline for the turnaround of the deal. So I think making sure that your focus in business, first and foremost, is on consistent and regular cash flow. Because the difference between what Dan and I are doing is, without consistent cash flow, the business is not sustainable. And so by focusing on really, really short turnaround deals that allow your business to sustain, it's the absolute most crucial metric that you need to be tracking and, effectively using, because it is investing to a certain degree. But the thing is, like, it doesn't do me any good if I buy a land flip that's going to take 10 years to sell, as versus buying an apartment complex or a commercial building or a single family rental. So I think that was kind of my last point on something to consider with determining when to pivot and when to not pivot, is making sure your metrics are true, effective metrics that are important.
So the one thing I'd like to add to that is one of the biggest solves for the unpredictability of accounts receivable is, especially as you get up and going, speaking to what we said the whole time about layering, is there are a number of markets where I can project with almost certainty because I know them so well. I know street by street. I know what's going on. I know, so keeping those markets going helps to create a far greater level of predictability in the monthly cash flow. So that's been really useful and just kind of food for thought there. A whole nother reason why, you do 5% pivots and you layer things on. You don't totally stop what's been working and what is predictable. So last point I'll make there. But
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I think that's the place to take us home is the more data you can keep, the more trends you're going to be able to actually create. So even if you're at a point in your business where you're hearing stuff like 15 grand on social media ads and 10,000 mailers a month and full-time in-house cold callers, and you're like, I'm not at a point where I can budget for that or afford to spend, 5 to 20 grand a month on marketing. Whenever you're at that stage where you're sending 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 letters or making 500 cold calls, is the easiest point in time to be able to keep track of every single metric that you can, which is going to allow you to be able to make more effective decisions in the future of when to determine to stay the course or slightly pivot or to stack a strategy or to add a market or to reduce a market on. And it puts all those systems in place, which allows you to be an effective decision owner. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be pivot or die. It could be stay the course and make a ton of money. But Dan, anything else or take us home?
No, I think that's good. So this is Dan Haberkost and Mason McDonald with the Big Picture Blueprint signing off.